Dijital Manzara YouTube kanalından herkese sevgiler, saygılar, muhabbetler olsun. Uzunca bir aranın ardından tekrardan selamlar, selamünaleyküm. Uzunca bir ara dedim. Arkada hummalı bir çalışma, kocaman bir hikaye ile sizlerin huzuruna yakın zamanda çok farklı programlarla gelecek. Bu kadar ara verdik ama beklediğinize de değecek araydı. Ama bu süreç içerisinde de tabiri caizse çok kıymetli bir ismi röportaj yapmak için yakalamak nasip oldu ki bugün kendisi yurttan ayrılacak. Yanımızdaki konuğu takdim edeyim sizlere. Helen O'Sullivan. Tam telaffuzuyla kendisinden öğrendiğim kadarıyla. Kimdir Helen O'Sullivan? Hani şehadetine Allah'ın Tin suresinde ifade buyurduğu gibi zeytine andolsun der ya ve tini ve zeytuni der ya. Bizim de zeytin ağaçlarının arasında şehadetine şahit olduğumuz ve şehadetine yemin etmiş olduğumuz Ayşenur Ezgi'nin çok yakın arkadaşı, aktivist ve o süreç içerisinde o şehadete yürüyen hikayenin arasında bizzat yanında bulunan, şehadetine yakinen şahitlik etmiş olan ünlü aktivist Avusturyalı Helen O'Sullivan bugün kendisiyle hem o süreci hem şu anki süreci hem kendi gözünden de Gazze, Kudüs, Filistin manzarasını konuşmuş olacağız. Kıymetli bir röportaj daha sizlerle. Hoş geldiniz tekrardan. Ben de hemen konuğuma dönüyorum. Efendim hoş geldiniz, kıymet verdiniz Helen Hanım.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hemen ilk soruyla başlayalım. Türkiye'ye daha önce geldiniz mi? Türkiye hakkındaki düşünceleriniz, fikirleriniz, bunu öncelikle merak ediyoruz. Türkiye'ye daha önce gelmiş miydiniz? Türkiye'de daha önce bulundunuz mu?
Yes, this is the third time I've been to Turkey. Alhamdulillah. Every time I come, it is for humanitarian reasons, not to be a tourist. And this time I've come here for humanitarian reasons. And what do I think about Turkish people? I love Turkish people, of course, and I love Turkish food. I love your architecture. And most importantly, I love the support from Turkish people for Palestinians right now.
Evet, her ne kadar İngilizceyi çok algılamasak da gönülden gönüle giden bir dil var ya, o sıcaklık gönül diliyle de bir taraftan çözülüyor ama bizler yine konuyu İngilizce olarak devam ettirmiş olalım. Peki sizi bir kısaca tanısak, kimdir Helen O'Sullivan?
First of all, most importantly, I'm a mother. I have 3 children who are adult children, and they have children of their own. So I am a grandmother of 7 children. All my working life, I have worked in an area in Australia we call social work, which is around interest in protecting vulnerable people, not just in Australia, but also overseas.
Peki Gazze'ye gitme niyetiniz neydi? Gazze'deki o yaşanan süreci anlatmanızı istesek.
In April, I, like a lot of people, I think, was highly distressed about what was happening in Gaza. And the last story that prompted me to action was listening to 5-year-old Palestinian girl Hind talk to her family about the bomb that had just hit and killed a number of family members in the car they were fleeing. The world heard him speak. She was terrified. She was 5 years old and she was alone with her little cousin with a car full of dead relatives. And she was begging for help and reassurance. That conversation was broadcast across the world. And for me, it was just a huge tragedy to hear what happened next. The paramedics, the Palestinian health workers that are there raced to her aid, only to be missiled again by the Israeli occupation force. And both Hind, her cousin, and the 2 paramedics were killed. to me, that was a call to action. And for many people, we look and hear those stories every single day, not just for 12 months since 7th of October, but these stories have been going on for decades. People keep thinking that this is a response to 7th of October. No, I've been in West Bank. I have been in Palestinian territories. They have been living this horror, this apartheid, this oppression for decades. Yeah.
Ayşe, şehit olduğunda yanındaydın. Bize o anları anlatmanı istesek. O anlarda neler hissettin? O anları bize anlatır mısın?
Ayşenur, I'd met in training in Palestinian territories, and 2 days of training, and then on the third day, both Ayşenur and I volunteered to attend the Beta protest. At that protest, this is a village that had their land stolen off them 2.5 years ago. Like a lot of Palestinian lands, the land is being slowly taken over by Israeli migrants illegally, and the international courts have said it's illegal. It still persists. So on that particular village, on that particular day, Ayşenur and I, our role was as international volunteers to make sure we had our cameras out. That's the only weapons international volunteers carry, are cameras. And on that day, there was Juma, it was Friday. Every Friday they have this protest. People pointed out the Israeli soldiers that were already up the hill and stationed ready to attack. After Juma prayers, Ayşenur and I walked across the road. Before we even crossed the road into the olive grove, the Israeli occupation force had fired 2 tear gas canisters into the group of boys. We were affected as well. And then minutes after, the first live ammunition was shot from the Israeli occupation force. That bullet ricocheted and hit a young Palestinian boy in the leg. We were shocked by how quickly that escalated. There was no warning by the Israeli occupation force, none at all. Ayşenur and I quickly raced over into the olive grove. We raced down because we were told once we knew that there was live ammunition, we had to retreat quickly because we knew that, like, they have killed 17 Palestinians in that same protest over the last 2 years. So 17 young people have been killed already. 2 weeks before that, they started targeting international volunteers at that same protest. And there were only probably about 20 young boys shouting at that time. They were no threat to these Israeli soldiers who had state-of-the-art weapons supplied by US and other Western countries. So when we raced behind the olive tree, we waited. It was quiet. We thought things were safe. Then I heard a second shot and Ayşenur fell to the ground. We had not realized that Israel occupation force had set up a sniper on top of the Palestinian home, and they would have had a very clear view. This was no accident, which they claim it was accident. We were standing still. There was no chaos around us. It was an execution. And when she fell to the ground, there was already the Palestinians expecting injury had an ambulance, and they quickly took her to hospital. But of course, she did not survive. When we got to the hospital, there were photographers and journalists and officials there to report on the death of a US citizen and a Turkish citizen. What we didn't know was the next day, there was also in that morgue a 13-year-old Palestinian girl named Bana Abu Baker. No one was there to report on her execution. She was shot also by an Israeli soldier in a completely separate incident. The fact that there were no journalists there to report on that, to talk to the grieving family, must tell the world something about the frequency of the deaths in the West Bank. Not just what we know to be Gaza, what the poor Gazans are experiencing, but also in the West Bank, and not just since the 7th of October. These people have been living under this fear, the trauma, physical trauma and the psychological trauma of illegal occupation, illegal apartheid, and the illegal taking of Palestinian lands. Ayşenur went there to defend their rights, to report on this, because we know journalists like yourself do not survive very long in Palestinian territories occupied by Israel. We know in Gaza that the journalists are being targeted. So as international volunteers, we were there to report as much as we can about what the settlers are doing and what the Israeli soldiers are doing. So I was afraid. I was not brave. I was afraid on that day, and I was shocked. I was shocked with just how easily the Israeli army could shoot a young 26-year-old citizen of Turkey and the US. But it's not just internationals, obviously. We have at least 43,000 people massacred in Gaza in the last 12 months that we know of. The Save the Children non-government organisation has reported there are 20,000 children who are missing in Gaza. And they also report that 10 children a day are losing their limb in Gaza. So what we're seeing in Gaza is what we expect to see in occupied territories in Palestine. The Israeli regime has said there is no solution other than genocide. They have argued for the massacre of people in Palestine so that they can continue building this Zionist state. Now, this is an apartheid state. Again, this is illegal. We have the UN speaking out against it, but US are supporting it. And countries like where I'm from, Australia, are also complicit in this and need to start backing away from financial support, because what we know in the future, just like the Holocaust in World War II, people will look at who supported this genocide. We said in World War II, we would never again allow this to happen on our planet. And what are we seeing now? We are seeing the worst humanitarian catastrophe that we have seen in the 21st century. This is a massacre, and it is supported, and this is where it is different from World War II. It is supported by large amounts of governments across Europe, the US, and even Australia. We support it by allowing them to continue the rhetoric or the discourse that all Palestinians, including children and babies, are terrorists. This is nonsense. This is just feeding into the fear and then feeding into the expectation that this is the only solution. War is not the only solution. Israel needs to be forced to come to the table and to negotiate peace.
Sizce Gazze'de yaşananlar Batı'daki İslam düşüncesini değiştirir mi? Bu anlamda İslamofobinin kırıldığını düşünüyor musunuz? Batılılar İslamofobinin kırıldığını düşünüyor mu?
No, because I think media is still trying to push the message to the West that all Arabs are terrorists. And this is the message we are seeing in Western media, that Israel is defending themselves against terrorism. The horrible truth is that what they are doing is the worst terrorism we have seen in the 21st century. We have seen massacres in the last 12 months, but we have seen illegal occupation and expansionism in the West Bank for decades now. I have lived with the Palestinians in the 6 months past the execution of Ayşenur. I have seen the daily persecution, the daily intimidation of families in the West Bank. And the world is not seeing this message. When I was in the West Bank, when I was in Palestinian territory, it was clearly owned and controlled by the Israeli soldiers, the Israeli government. The world is not seeing how these people are struggling, how they survive under the psychological trauma of having to go through checkpoints, having no authority or ability to extend or build or renovate buildings that settlers have destroyed. People are intimidated daily by settlers. And where are these settlers coming from? The ones I met were coming from America, Texas. They were coming from Canada, Ukraine. These people are migrating into Israel and claiming that this land is their land. Indigenous Palestinians have been there for generations and generations. They will not give up on their land, and they will resist. And the world hopefully will start to see this resistance as justified resistance, not as terrorism. So I heard someone explain recently when they said, well, are we just giving in to Hamas or terrorism? And the answer was very crystal clear. If the world is not going in to protect the massacre of women and children and elderly people, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, we are leaving a vacuum. And who is going to fill the vacuum other than Hamas? The world is leaving them be in the center stage. So we can't complain. We have to come in and abide by international law. We are not asking for anything more than justice. Abide by international law. Stop the occupation in the West Bank. Stop massacring people in Gaza and now in Lebanon. Where is this going to end? War is not the solution.
Bazı insanlara göre Filistin Arap sorunu, Arapların sorunu. Sizce de öyle mi? Filistin Arapların sorunu mu? Arapların meselesi mi? Bizi ilgilendirmez diyenler var. Siz bu konuda ne düşünüyorsunuz?
I think it's very short-sighted of any country to think this is none of their business. This is not an Arab issue. This is a humanitarian issue. This is a human rights issue. If our neighbor in our suburb is attacked by criminals and we ignore it, we are making that criminal more powerful. And where will that criminal go next? To your home. You cannot ignore injustice in this world, because you will one day be at that end of that criminal's knife or gun or missile. So no, it's a humanitarian issue. This is why there are so many people across the world who are standing up for Palestine, particularly our young people who realize that this is hypocrisy by the Western governments, hypocrisy by Israel to start claiming what Israel is doing is self-defense. This is not self-defense. This is why I will not call Israel Defense Force. It is an Israel occupation force. It is not defending itself when it's killing babies and children.
Helen, İsrail terör devletine ve İsrailli askerlere bu soykırımı hangi duygu yaptırıyor?
The motivation of the people with money and power is money and power. That is their motivation, money and power. And if we look through the history of the world, that's been a driving factor for a lot of criminal actions. They may use an ideology or a belief or a religious view to try and involve the whole population in that particular motivation. But the motivation is about greed. So the Zionist ideology goes back a couple of hundred years, as far as I'm aware. The Zionists believe that God gave them all of Palestine and all that land is theirs, that belongs to Jewish people alone. And this belief is their belief, but it's not the belief of a lot of people who are Jewish. The Australian Jewish Council, for example, are very critical of the Netanyahu regime, more critical than our own government. They don't believe in Zionism. Zionism is not equal to Judaism, and it's important to make that distinction. So I think that is part of the propaganda that we're listening to on our Western media, at least, is that this is about religion. No, this is about money. This is about greed. This is about land. Australian government recently, or a number of months ago, quietly gave $1 trillion contract to an Israeli company, a weapons company, Albert. We know that Chevron, Caltex Fuel, is exploiting Palestinian territory, natural resources. Again, international law is being broken all the time and has been for decades. Israel is plundering territory owned by Palestinian people. They are tapping into their resources. They are getting billions and billions of dollars via US and other Western companies, not just for weapons, but also for export and trade. And because we know this is the main motivating force behind a lot of these killings and the massacres within Palestine, an important action to take for all of us is to stop feeding that fire with our investments. Stop buying products that are made in Israel. Stop investing. Stop sending goods and fuel to Israel, because what are we doing by doing that? We are feeding this massacre. We are feeding this genocide. We all become complicit if we don't stop giving oxygen, stop giving financial assistance in whatever way possible to this regime. Only then will Israel be willing to come to the table in good faith, looking for peace, not for control, but peace.
Senin hayalindeki Filistin, senin hayalindeki Kudüs, Gazze nasıl? Senin manzarandan nasıl?
My dream, I would think, is the dream of pretty much the whole world, except for those making the decisions about weapons. And that dream is for not just peace, but peace built on justice. So you cannot have peace unless it has a foundation of social justice. So to try and get peace and build it on the massacre of Palestinians, to build it on stolen lands, is unthinkable. So my dream is to have both justice and peace, not just in the West Bank, but across the whole of the Middle East.
Peki bir Avustralyalı olarak Avustralya devletinin meseleye yaklaşımı, tavrı nasıl? Konuya nasıl yaklaşıyor Avustralya?
We have heard from the Australian government quite regularly on what's happening in Gaza. And like the US, they speak one thing and do another. And this, I think, everyone should be aware of, looking at what people do, what are our governments doing, because that's how we judge, not what they're saying. So the Australian government, like the US government, are saying Netanyahu, stop bombing Rafah, stop bombing Gaza, ceasefire now, come to the table. They're all saying the right things that would lead you to believe they want peace and they want justice. But what are they doing? They are still feeding the machine that is killing children, that are massacring thousands and thousands of Palestinians. And as I mentioned earlier, the Australian government had recently signed an agreement with Albert, a weapons company, to the amount of near $1 trillion contract. So when the governments are still doing that, we know they are not sincere. We are not. So everyone should be looking at what governments say and what their governments are doing. Are we still feeding Israel with investments? Are we still providing imports and exports? Are we still trading with Israel? Because if we are, then what we say is irrelevant. It's what we're doing that makes the difference.
Peki gösterilen tepkiler sence yeterli mi? Bu soykırımın son bulması için daha başka ne yapılmalı?
Yeah, free Palestine is what my heart dearly wants, and all the volunteers I worked with want a free Palestine. The Palestinians want a free Palestine. And from what I've learned from Palestinians in the time I was there was that they are grounded in the earth there. They are not going to give up that land. That is their life. So I have seen Palestinians picking olives. I've picked olives with them at harvest time. They can see soldiers coming towards them, and those soldiers are armed with state-of-the-art weapons, tear gas, and they are there with nothing but the tools they have to pick the olives. I was afraid for them and us as these soldiers were approaching. But what did the Palestinian villagers do? They could see these soldiers approaching. What did they do? They started laughing and singing, and they kept taking the olives from their olive tree. So what I learned from that was that no matter how many weapons, no matter how much support the US and the West give Israel, they'll never have peace if they don't look for solutions that don't involve weapons. People are grounded in that land. That is, they're in their homeland. They will not give it up. So what's going to work? We know bombing is not going to find a solution for anyone, either side. We know that the solution has to come about through negotiation, through peaceful negotiation. But Israel has got no reason to come to that discussion. They've got no reason at all, because no matter what they do, US will promise them and supply them with everything they need. So even though we know that boycotting and divesting and sanctioning Israel is affecting their economy, this is why they made it so illegal in their territories to mention BDS, boycott, divest and sanction, because it's already having an impact on their economy. We know that will work, but still, as long as the West is providing them with economic support and diplomatic support, they've got no reason to come and negotiate. They can bomb Lebanon, they can massacre a whole population, and the world can't do anything about it because we're supporting it. So we have to, if you talk about what their motivation is greed, is money, is land, is power. If we're going to stop it, we have to stop feeding their greed, stop feeding their money, stop feeding their power. And to me, that will force them to come and negotiate at the table and find peace.
Çok teşekkür ederiz. Çok kıymetli bir program daha icra ettiğimizi düşünüyorum. Tarihe şahit olanlar, tarihe tanık olanlar, şehadete şahitlik edenler bir gün gergin uykulardan uyanacaktır diye umut ediyoruz. Bizi izlediğiniz için çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Kanala abone olup yorum yaparsanız desteğiniz de bu bağlamda çok kıymetli. Sesin daha çok yerlere ulaşabilmesi adına ben çok teşekkür ediyorum Helen. İyi ki varsın, iyi ki katıldın. Teşekkürler.
Thank you.
Thank you.